Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. In this podcast, I want to talk about creativity and how money factors into that, and how our relationship with the guides can support that, and some of the things that are really valuable to know about mindset in terms of producing anything that is going to find its way into kind of the economic side of things, where you're trading your creativity in some fashion for money. So there's a lot here. This may turn into a very, very long episode. But before I jump into this, I just wanted to chat with y'all about my experience with my podcast. So this feels a little crunchy and vulnerable to talk about, but it occurred to me that it might be a really useful thing to sort of share while I'm in the review process and the thinking about process. So I've just hit a really cool milestone of 40,000 unique downloads, and I don't know what the reach is because people can stream it instead of downloading it, and that doesn't register in the information that goes back to my hosting provider. And likewise, they can also download it but not actually get around to listening. So I don't know what the exact reach is, but looking over the various episodes, I can see that, there's a pretty steady number of people who are listening, and that's wonderful. It's really exciting to put my words and my ideas and the messages from the guides out into the world and have people consistently over time, because I keep dropping episodes. This will be past number 75, and people are still listening, and I'm still having those numbers. And this share or conversation was sort of prompted by someone I follow who's actually closing her business. She had a way bigger business than I ever thought about having, and she's closing it down. And she recorded a lengthy final episode to her podcast. And one of the things that she was sharing was, I'm hearing so much more as I'm closing down how much this has meant to people. And I really wish I'd known that sooner, because what I realized is I've kind of felt like I was speaking into the void. And I'm just sort of reviewing from a number of different lenses my experience with this podcast and what I offer, and do I want to keep it at the frequency it is? And those sorts of questions are sort of swirling around as I do my year-end business review. So when it comes to how I spend my time in creative endeavors, I'm always sort of running it through different parts of me that have different opinions and synergizing the results. So I look at how much time, how much money, how much energy, how much joy it brings, how much satisfaction, what I feel like I'm contributing to the world. There are all these different aspects of why I might get up to something. And it's one of the reasons, total aside, where someone giving me advice based on one Facebook post of what I really ought to do is generally pretty annoying, because I have likely considered a course of action from so many different vantage points. I have a lot more reasons than I could necessarily easily articulate, especially in the space of a Facebook post. And so everything that is the balance might not be something that someone from the outside would be in a position to recognize. And I had another episode where I talked about the value of qualified feedback and ways that we can navigate unqualified feedback. And it's nice to have people who get you to the depth that they can give you qualified reflections, because they have a fuller picture of who you are and all the aspects that are being balanced. And so I'd like to put out a general call, no pressure or obligation, but if there is value that you've found in this podcast, I would love to hear about it. It's great if you also share that with other people or leave a review. But one of the things I've noticed is the reviews don't seem to be increasing. And granted, people listen to podcasts in all different venues and spaces, so there may be really good reviews on some other platform that I'm not aware of. But I did notice, I hadn't even had it in my mind, but I did notice when this other person shared about closing down her podcast that it does often feel like I'm speaking into the void. I don't have an interview style podcast, so I'm alone in a room with a cat who's sometimes dubious that I'm talking into a microphone instead of petting her. And so I just want to invite you, if you feel called, if it's appropriate, to leave a review, to say something on social media and tag me. I know I don't have a lot of that set up, but if you're wondering how to do it, we can figure that out. Or just if you want to drop me an email, I'll put my email address in the show notes, and I'd love to hear if this is something that really has value for you, because that's part of my intention with offering it. And certainly I have had some people take the time to give me feedback, but they've been a little bit few and far between. And so I just wanted to kind of offer that. And I also want to offer, from just looking at this from the business hat. So there's the contribution side of me that finds value in doing this for the sake of contributing to people's lives. There's the expression and creativity that finds this rewarding in its own right because I'm in the creation process. I do a lot of creating, I knit things, I sew things that really aren't particularly going out into the world. They're just for the sheer joy of creating and making something. And I think that's really important. So if you want to go deeper on this, Elizabeth Gilbert has an absolutely magnificent book called Big Magic, where she just talks about how important it is to humans and human well-being to have creativity for creativity's sake. And so of all the ways I could spend my creativity, this is a satisfying outlet. There's also the shamanic connection. My guides have a lot to say. One of the things I really notice about doing these podcasts is I kind of put a limit on recording no more than 2 episodes in a row because my voice doesn't hold up to that. I have other things to do. But there's always more inspiration stacked behind. So my guides sort of take turns saying, okay, give them this message. Okay, share this message. And if you've noticed, sometimes I move around a lot. I cover a lot of territory. I circle back. A lot of that has to do with just this flow that my guides have worked out of taking turns delivering messages. And they're just some really cool helping spirits that would like their wisdom transmissions put into words. They have things to offer. And there's a lot of joy in hearing that guidance and then speaking that guidance. So that's a really cool thing about doing this. But I want to be transparent. When I put on my business hat, that's where I'm starting to kind of question the viability of the podcast. So one part is impact. And even if I make no money from it, but people's lives are really genuinely made better as a result of this, that has, a great deal of merit. But there's also the aspect where I've certainly had some really wonderful clients come in of people who have listened to my podcast. And whenever they start the conversation with that, I'm feeling like, oh, this is going to be a really good fit. Because if somebody's already listened to where I'm coming from and what I have to share in this long form, they're likely to be really aligned with me. And that's really wonderful. But the thing I'm looking at from a business perspective is I'm not necessarily seeing growth in terms of the podcast. So the number of unique downloads keeps going up, but a lot of that, I imagine, is the same people downloading the next episode as it's released. So if I have this really cool group of humans who's really interested to, listen to me talk and listen to what I have to say, like that's awesome in its own right. But from a business perspective, in something that ideally is bringing people in who it's a win-win for them to exchange money in exchange for my services, I'm not sure how effective this is. I spend a lot of money, frankly. I have the sound editor, the hosting fees, the time where I'm not, engaging in something else. I admit I would way rather record a podcast than do SEO work or work on, some of those funnels to bring people in. I resist those kind of things. And so I'm having a conversation with myself that is really just around the business viability of this. And part of what I love is this is something that I can offer to my listeners for free. They're people are in really different economic situations, and I love having something that I can just share as a gift. And it would be really nice if the people who couldn't afford to do anything had this as a gift, and hopefully it was supportive for them. And then, people who maybe did have some money and did spend it in this space, and that was relevant, it acted as something that resulted in supporting my business overall. And again, for those of you listening who are like, I totally became a client, thank you. I love that I get to work with you. But I just want to put that out there. So I want to offer an invitation as I'm, just kind of mulling this over, to consider perhaps writing a review, to consider taking a look at my offerings and just seeing if there's something that I offer. My price points start at around $25 for the things that I offer. So taking a look and just taking the time to read and see if there's something that would genuinely resonate with you. I'm not necessarily asking that you buy something you don't genuinely want, but it is super helpful if you find a course you'd like to have, or things like that. If you're following my work closely, you may notice that I haven't released any new courses in my academy, and that has just been a reflection of consistently what people usually buy supposedly is the free things, and the things that have a price point less so. And so I'm just recognizing that much as I love to have these deep teachings on all these amazing subjects and gather all this different wisdom from the guides and offer it in an on-demand kind of context, that's just not what people are most wanting to receive and most willing to pay me money for. And I totally respect that. I think there's this amazing dance of entrepreneurship, which is, at its best, can I provide something that resonates for people? And, what would people like to receive, and what has a value that's at the price point of what I can provide? Yeah, so in addition to letting me know if this is something that matters to you and is helpful for you, and taking a look at my offerings and seeing if there's something that resonates that you'd be interested in purchasing, it's also super helpful if you leave reviews. If this is something that you like and have value, I imagine that if you're listening to an episode this far in the game, you're somebody who hopefully enjoys and appreciates what I'm offering. And so, 5-star reviews, comments, if you have the time, those are really helpful, and helping to spread the word, because again, I feel like there's a certain, group of people who are receiving the content, and I love that that's a significant number. It's part of why I've, continued to put out recordings, because people are receiving them, because those numbers keep going up. But if it's kind of the same group of people, and I'm not adding new people who discover the work or discover the wisdom, there's my sort of business hat that is asking the question of, do I maybe want to rest on having all of these episodes that are super cool? Do I maybe want to take a sabbatical? Do I maybe want to reduce the frequency? So these are just questions, and I wanted to bring them up at a point where I haven't made a decision, because depending on, what feedback or response I get from my audience, that can really influence the direction I go. And I want to offer this just as a bigger conversation of something that may not be on your radar in the same way, because there's so much competition for listeners and viewers and people who've monetized YouTube really effectively and things like that. We see a lot of the kind of people who've been most successful. As a result, that's more of the content that we see. And the exchange that's trying to be brought in is give us your attention, and then we can run some ads and we'll generate some revenue, and this supports what we're doing, and that's wonderful. But you may want to kind of look around and see where you might be consuming something from a solo entrepreneur, something that's not monetized and not running ads, and just kind of consider the money and the time and the effort that's going into offering this thing, and maybe consider if leaving a positive review or something, or a share on social media or something, would feel like a good energy exchange. And I know not everybody is in a place where it's a good thing to be public about like, yay, I listen to the Practical Shamanism podcast. So this may not be something that's relevant or appropriate for you. So I don't want to put any pressure or expectation, but it's just sort of a perspective of how we do energy exchanges with the world. I'm very much I'm recording this in December, and I'm enjoying being in my lair, being home in the quiet environment. But a friend of mine was saying, look, there's a maker's market, and it's basically all these people who do crafts, and they're having this big fair. And I didn't end up going because introvert crowds, having to leave my lair, it offset. But if I was going to go to something, that notion of spending money on people who, have out of passion created something beautiful that could also be useful or appeal to me, has a lot of appeal. I think there's a lot of merit in kind of the mass-produced world for engaging with things that are handmade and created with intention and love. And it's just something to kind of think about or muse on as you move through the world. And I want to be super clear that if this is just a place where you come and you receive something that has value, and reaching out to tell me that or leaving a review or whatever isn't the right thing for you, I totally respect that. I'm definitely not wanting to put strings or a guilt trip or, you really ought to do this thing, or ask people to spend money that doesn't really feel aligned for them. I'm a really big fan of the win-win. And that's why, for me, how I move with this will be whatever's the right choice for me. But so far, I've really been loving sharing this, and I have many, many, many topics that I could still speak about, because I'm 23 years into talking to my guides on a daily basis, and over 10,000 shamanic journeys that I've done, to take counsel with the guides about specific things. And there's just such a wealth of ideas and inspiration, plus that just, open conduit where different guides have different things to share. One of the things that's interesting, I feel like it's worth sharing for people who embark on a creative endeavor and are thinking about how their guides support them or work with them or engage with them. I had this very interesting experience where a friend of mine, who's also a shamanic practitioner, and I went to Hawaii, and we did all this cool work with the land. We did spirit release work, we did land healing, we did soul retrieval for places where the land hadn't been respected. There was this really dynamic, deep, magical week that we spent just driving around, following the energy, having experiences, talking to the guardians of the land, seeing how energy flowed, and it was a really rich experience. And we came back with the idea that we should write a book. We should write a book. So we started. I don't think this book is ever destined to be published, but typity type, a significant word count was generated, and we were talking, and we kept looking at each other and saying, I feel like the thing to do is just to write the book. It's just write the book. Don't do anything else. Write the book. Focus on this. And what I realized when I thought about that a little bit more is that the guides that had things to say for a Hawaii book just didn't care about anything else in my life. Of course, it wasn't their job. Their job was to share and distill the inspiration and the ideas and what would be useful out of this, and they were really interested. And when we put the project down, those guides went off to find someone else. Elizabeth Gilbert talks about this experience in her book, Big Magic, and I really resonated with that part. No harm, no foul. Nobody's mad at us that this is dormant on our respective hard drives, that we never went forward with this. But those guides were just interested in that. And likewise, my podcast guides could care less about, soul retrieval work that I'm doing for people, or the times when I'm organizing my errands for the day, my, keeps Katie safe in the car team of guides. I have nothing to do with podcasts. And so when you're feeling creative inspiration, I think it's really useful to think about inviting in your team of guides that really supports you in something you're doing for the world. And when I get to work with someone who's a therapist therapist or an addiction counselor or doing energy work for people, I really see this massive team of guides that comes in when they're doing the work. And then I'm strengthening and supporting them, having the right protections and inspiration and support for that. So ideally they don't burn themselves out. They have that, infinite well of energy. Often when I get into doing shamanic work, I think of it like my free pass, because I could have been tired or have brain fog, and then I get into the flow, and then suddenly I'm energized and clear and present, and it's just a really cool thing. And unlike drinking too much coffee, which I have a habit of doing, it doesn't seem to have this, this negative effect on the other side. But then with these people who are, here in some kind of service to others, who are doing that in some sort of formal way on a regular basis, there's also really strengthening their personal team of guides. And sometimes they haven't developed as many guides to, help them drive places safely and help them meet the people that they would just really enjoy the human side of their life. I think of our incarnations as often having a personal and a transpersonal aspect, and there are just different teams of helping spirits that are relevant to those. And so I just want to offer that if you get into the inspiration of creativity, that sometimes the intensity of that isn't that overall perspective on your life. And that was at the beginning when I was talking about, there's the satisfaction of connection of wisdom to the guides, but then there's my business manager part that is looking at finding a sustainable way to exchange my time and talent for money so that, everything works out in that regard. And then there's the time after to play with for creativity for its own sake. And all these different things that balance together. And I think that that's a really important piece. I feel like there's sort of a mythology that has grown up in the modern world of find the thing you're passionate about, do that, and then you'll be able to make money and you'll feel like you never worked a day in your life. And first of all, that's a whole nother myth of the if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. That's a ridiculous premise. I work so much more passionately and so much more dedicated in such a more dedicated way as a shamanic practitioner than I ever did as an engineer. So there can be enormous amounts of effort and engagement and labor that goes into the thing that you really love. And there's just a different worth it equation and a deeper engagement. And I think there's a lot of quality of life in that. But a lot of really passionate people burn themselves out, and a lot of really passionate, talented, amazing people aren't as good at the entrepreneur side. And there is a real entrepreneur side to the trading your time and talent for money, especially if you're making art or doing really creative things, because it's just in terms of, how money flows, there's such a machine of capitalism engaging people in a different way. And I'm not against capitalism, but there seems to be this myth that if you find the thing you love more than anything else, you'll be able to monetize it. And I don't think that's necessarily true. And I think that going in believing that to be, a factual thing has led people astray. And I've witnessed this in community. There was this really beautiful woman who channeled exquisite things, who just quit her day job with kind of no backup plan on the premise that spirit would provide. She had a beautiful spirit and energy and wonderful things to provide, and she ended up living in her car because she just didn't have an infrastructure to support it, and her premise that spirit would just somehow make it happen. There are people who can really rock ways and means, and everything kind of works out, and they find an opportunity and something happens. And to be honest, I don't think she was overly fussed about living in her car, which I would be. I'd be fussed if I was living in my car. But, for some people, they're like, yeah, let me crash on your couch. That'd be cool. And they enjoy an enormous amount of freedom by being a little bit nomadic. Van life has become incredibly popular. And for a lot of people, you just don't need the kind of revenue if living out of a van and having all that freedom is really appropriate for you. And the other thing about monetizing creativity is the Venn diagram of what your creativity is, those two circles that overlap. As a former engineer, love Venn diagrams, so much information conveyed so effectively. But there's the circle of things people pay you for, and there's the circle of your creativity. And depending on the form your creativity takes, those circles can have more or less overlap. But I would argue that for most people, most of the time, the vast majority of our creativity just doesn't fall into something that people will pay us for. So if you look at my YouTube channel, I have this totally non-related to any other content. I made a cover for my cold plunge, and I made a video because I had a really, really hard time finding the idea of how to do this. And cold plunges made yourself are really popular. And what I know about thermodynamics is a hardcover instead of one of those, really, really thin ones off of Amazon are going to be way better. So I made this, and I had so much fun. I had so much fun with the project. I had so much fun figuring it out, mapping it out in my mind, and then, sharing what I created. And there's absolutely no money in that. My YouTube channel is I don't foresee a future where it ever goes to the point that it would be possible to monetize. I don't even really aspire to that. I feel like what I have to offer is so complex and nuanced that it just wouldn't translate particularly well into the mainstream. So I'm all about, the serving the people that really resonate with what I have to offer and right livelihood within that, rather than, things growing to this huge, really, really public thing. So there was just a lot of joy in the parts of me that turned on for problem solving and building and figuring out how to work with stuff. And I remembered that was something I used to periodically do as a child. I'd have some thing I wanted to create. And I remember once I came to college in San Diego and, was living an urban life instead of the country farm life with 5 acres, there were times I was really disappointed that baling wire wasn't readily available, because you could always grab some baling wire to, secure a thing or make a thing or play with a thing. And, just being able to go grab some baling wire was no longer attainable. And so I think it's important to find ways to have the work-life balance, whatever we're doing, even if you're doing something you're so passionate about. That's something that's really been a part of my journey over the last, I don't know, seven years or so of just being with the question of, how do I not have this business that I love, this work that I adore providing, be the only thing that I'm up to? How do I wrangle it so that I can, make the money I need to make and have the fullness of that, but still have space and time left over on the other side for some of the other parts of life? And, I spent over 10 years in business just happily being consumed. I gave up hobbies that I really liked. I used to play in the SCA, which is the Society for Creative Anachronism, and be involved in tabletop role-playing games. And they were so cool and so creative. And at some point I put them down because of what the business required in order to stay solvent and to build. And I have zero regrets about that. I mourned letting go of some of these experiences. I'd had so much richness with them. They were marvelous at a time where I was extremely socially awkward because there was a lot of inclusion and acceptance. So really cool chapter of my life that I put down in order to do this other thing. But then, over time, there was the question of how do I balance this? And I think it's a good life question to say we all brim with more creativity than we could ever actualize. And I really resonated with, I think both Brene Brown and Elizabeth Gilbert have talked about how creativity that is not activated in positive directions can metastasize and become something really problematic. I have a client who was really troubled with these sort of repetitive thinking loops. Her brain would just loop and loop and loop. And then she got involved in a new career that was really intellectually engaging. And when I looked at her in shamanic reality, I stopped seeing all this buildup of energy of her mind just circling and circling and circling. And I really celebrated that for her. So even if it hadn't made her money, which it is making her money, but even if it hadn't, there was so much quality of life of learning new things and developing a new skill. And so I just really want to encourage people to kind of think about creativity as being, we have all these shoulds and supposed tos and, important things. So we're like, okay, I'm trying for that, at least that 150 minutes of, exercise that's recommended. And okay, I should eat this many vegetables and it would be good to get this much sleep. And okay, I need to, ideally have some mindfulness practices that bring my fight or flight down. And, the list can seem really, really endless. It's part of why I'm such a fan of, what gets you the most bang for your buck? What is the most supportive for your mental and physical health? I think those are really good questions. But how can creativity be a get to instead of a have to? Like, one of my really good friends is a gardener, and she just really defends and organizes around her time to be out curating this beautiful garden space. And at the same time, she makes really thoughtful choices about like, well, I think I'm going to let go of this part of the garden because the amount of time it's taking and what that's doing with my life isn't the right balance. So when we have these non-monetized, for the joy of the quality of life expressions of creativity, we may choose appropriately to have balance, to have it be an important voice at the table when we decide how to spend our time and curate our life. But it may not be something we can overly indulge, or at least not without, again, some really dramatic changes in our lives. So the people who are like, yeah, I can make van life work, may have the opportunity to live much more creative lives in ways that are non-monetized. And similarly, there just isn't a particular correlation to the exquisiteness of what you're putting into the world and the ability to make money at it. It's a completely separate skill set to monetize your creativity that involves a lot of things that are spreadsheets and, how do I get this in front of people and all of these kind of questions. I think we're in a time where there's been a real blossoming of entrepreneurship, which I think is cool. I'm definitely for it. I think there's complexity. I have a friend who, quit her corporate job to teach yoga and had a number of years and then ended up going back because it was a reasonable job with a reasonable number of hours, and the reliability of the paycheck was just really stabilizing for her and her family and much more aligned. And so I certainly know people who have decided that having an infrastructure with a really predictable and reasonable amount of their time and energy exchanged for money is really, really good, has a lot of merit. So there's kind of a lot here. Again, I think there's a lot of longing to be able to be paid for doing what we love, and I think everything is right and good with that. And at the same time, there's a lot of things that have nothing to do with what we love, unless you're particularly geeky about business, that we end up doing in order to be paid for the things that we love. So there are pros and cons to monetizing your creativity. It can certainly be done. It can be done as a side hustle. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of merit to finding a way to curate your life such that you get to be in relationship to non-monetized creativity for its own sake. And creativity begets creativity. So the more you kind of open those channels and have that access to inspiration and possibilities, there's a lot of things that are just really nicely connected to our well-being in terms of that journey of what do I want to make and what do I want to do or what do I want to create. And I just love the internet and what it provides for being able to just explore things. You can get watercolors super cheap on Amazon and pull up a YouTube video about watercolor painting, or, pay an affordable amount for a really cool master class. Like I'm really enjoying a iPhone photography class, and I have no aspirations whatsoever to be an excellent photographer. I'm just trying for the lower level of mediocrity as opposed to absolutely zero formal training. And I'm really satisfied. It's a course with, a lot of beautiful settings in nature to teach these principles, and very, very well done. So you can get access very attainably to teaching and learning and kind of do the research and development. Oh, well, okay, I tried painting, didn't much love it. I tried this, I tried that. I'd like somebody to teach me knitting. It's a very attainable thing. I knitted a lot as a child, and I've forgotten anything that was more complicated, and I can just pull up the stitch on YouTube that I don't recognize the abbreviation for, and somebody's made an exquisite, well-lighted, very clear demonstration video. And so we have a lot of on-demand teaching and support and access to possibilities we might have never even thought of. And we can explore and see what puts us into flow state and see what feels good and see what is really supportive. Somebody was talking about knitting and the building up of oxytocin with the repetitive hand movements and using that to kind of equalize her emotional well-being. And I get it. There are times when I've been overstimulated where I just crave having a knitting project in my hands and that kind of flow that gets created that way. And I don't think I've ever sold anything that I've knitted. I don't think I've ever received any money for it. In fact, I just had a thing on Facebook come up where I'd found all this exquisite hand-dyed yarn, and I put it all in a basket and took a picture of like, yay, my new yarn, my new yarn. So obviously money has gone out the door rather than coming in related to this. But I just really feel like there's a huge part of human spirit, and it's very much connected to our intuition and our guidance and who we get to be in the world, and what at the end of our lifetime when we're doing that soul review would make us feel really good about the time that we spent here, the experience of the life journey. And sometimes there's some contribution in that, and not contribution in the, I found the cure to some terrible disease, yay me. Some people are up to that, yay them. But just even the kind of day-to-day, there was good in it for other people in the way that I was able to move through the world. I was able to tend to me first and fill up my own cup and have some abundance left over where I could be good to animals, or, tend a garden or support other people, or something that was an expression. And I also think our creativity of getting to have things in our lives that aren't related to money, because money can be so intrusive and fill up so much of our time and our mental space. And it's getting louder in this time of so much inflation and so much invitations to spend money in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So I just want to really invite you to just see where creativity might want to blossom. And if you are monetizing creativity, more power to you, but recognizing that it's a very small cutout of that circle that is monetizable, and that you probably want to make space for the fuller expression of that, so you're not limiting that really important human quality only to what you can exchange for money. And for sure, we have seasons when we're in hustle, and if you're a new parent, then the new parent is probably gonna drown out everything but the bare minimum of other parts of your life. There are times and seasons. If you're bringing a new business up, you may not have as much expression, but getting to sustainability in life, I think this is a thing to look at, as is there space and free time that can be apportioned in this way. And it's not just hours in the day, it's also some energy and bandwidth that I think is available. And the nice thing about things that aren't monetized is it kind of doesn't matter if anyone else appreciates them. And I think that there's some merit to having a space that we do for our own joy. I was talking to an artist, and he was saying that he took some commissions to stay afloat during COVID, and those were really stressful. And I totally got it, because if I make something for the joy of making it, and then someone wants it and wants to buy it, that's wonderful. But if I have them in my head over my shoulder for something I've promised them that may or may not look like what they imagined it would look like, I think that's more stressful. And likewise, I sent off some really beautiful stones to have wire wrapped into jewelry, and just interacting with the woman who does exquisite and extraordinary wire wrapping and who I was completely committed, I'm like, I am committed to loving whatever you produce. I could tell for her there was more like, I don't know how this is going to be received. Whereas if she created a piece that she just loved and put it out on a tray, then people could just sort around it. And so there's a lot of merit to not having that voice of evaluation or other people's opinions kind of in the mix for when you're in this kind of communion. If you were walking through an old growth forest and having this deep experience with nature by yourself, you're probably not imagining whether you're doing it right if you were deeply in the experience. And I think there's some value to creativity. And even if you are producing something for other people, one of the things I really worked with my first book, Practical Shamanism, A Guide for Walking in Both Worlds, which, I've been really happy with the success and the people who still continue to read it. But there was just a part of me that just, as I was stumbling through the words and getting them organized and before the edits and the raw first draft and this doesn't connect. And I kept having this feeling like, oh, nobody's going to want this. It's going to be terrible. And I just really told myself, like, it might be. I promise I will sit down and have a conversation with myself and see if this sucks before I embarrass myself by putting it out in the world. I promise that of all the reviews I do for spelling errors and punctuation and copy editing and everything else, one of them will be, am I legitimately willing to be seen? Am I willing to have people hear my stories in this way and see me at this level? And, does that work for me? Is that okay with me? And it was just a really great way when that voice sort of arose that was, saying, oh, this isn't going to work out. This isn't going to go well, to say, you'll have your turn. I'll chat with you. I'm just not going to chat with you now. And that kind of mental discipline was really helpful in being able to just be in the process of listening to my guides and seeing what wanted to be shared and seeing what wisdom their thoughts sparked in me and what bubbled up, and putting it on a page and then, editing it and working with it. I've had people go, oh, you're such a great writer. And I think they don't understand sometimes how many drafts go into the end result that is, quite competent at the skill of writing. So anyway, I hope there's something here that has value for you or gives you a different perspective. Of course, the main drive of this podcast is a way to contribute. And honestly, if I just had 5% of my audience sign up for my shamanic membership, my Patreon offer at the lowest tier, I wouldn't even be asking questions about what I might or might not do with the future of this podcast. So if it's something that you haven't looked at, I would appreciate it if you would just put eyes on it. It doesn't mean that you have to do it, but just taking the time to go to my website and see what I offer and see if there's something that would be a match for you. And if the answer is no, I totally respect that. I don't want anyone to spend money they don't have or receive work that doesn't feel aligned for them. I really want it to be a win-win, but I'm hoping that for some of you, there's something that resonates about my work, or that it resonates for you to leave a review or recommend this podcast to your friends if you've had value in it. So thank you for listening. I know this was a little bit of a different style, but I just wanted to include my audience in these questions and kind of see what comes back, if anything. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.